Okay, well, welcome everyone to our Q&A today on our topic of achieving literacy. But it's not limited to that. That's kind of just a focus, but you can definitely ask questions about anything of unschooling. So Golda and Robin, Golda, do you want to start by introducing yourself and maybe tell us what your definition of unschooling is too?
Okay, sure. We can. So unschooling to me is allowing a child to decide some or most of or all of what they want to learn instead of deciding for them. And the reason that I think that's important to do is because you have more buy-in. Any person, whether they're children or adults, are like buy in more and learn deeply and faster if they want to learn it, if they've decided that they want to learn it. So that's what unschooling is to me, is allowing personal choice to guide what the child learns, your student, your child, yourself even. And then that's basically my definition. It changes every week or every month, I should say.
Okay, thank you. And do you want to tell us a little bit about you?
Oh, right. I forgot about that part. So I'm Golda. I have a master's degree in education. I was a former principal, and I was a high school teacher for 14 years. And I discovered while doing my master's degree program that maybe the way we were doing school and what I'd been doing for the last over 10 years was maybe hurting kids, and should not be. So I read John Taylor Gatto's book Dumbing Us Down in a course that I was taking called Decolonizing Education. And I was shocked right to my core, and started to really research how people learn and why. And I also started really deeply thinking about why we do things the way that we do in the school system, and then started disagreeing with it. And also I started talking about it, which was unpopular in some ways with some of the people I was talking to. And so here now I work for a public school division, but as a homeschool coordinator, and also an advocate for homeschooling amongst my teacher and principal colleagues. It's not always popular, but that's what I do. And then of course I help facilitate homeschooling here in Alberta, Canada, because a lot of people because in Alberta you don't have to have a facilitator anymore, but it does help. And so I try to help people write their education plans and make sure that they can meet the requirements of the government. And then and that's easy for me to do because I do it all the time, but parents sometimes find it very intimidating, I guess. I also am writing a book called Demystifying Education. And so I have a website that I put up that has resources and things like that. And I'm in the process of writing a book about how the education system works to help parents and guardians navigate it better, because it's really hard and intimidating if you don't know how it's working from the inside. So that's my goal for the end of the summer, hopefully. So that's me.
Yay.
Oh, and I unschool my own child too. I should have mentioned that. That's kind of important.
Okay, Robin, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. So I'll introduce myself first. My name is Robin Robertson. I am an unschooling mom to 2 kids. My son is 14, he'll be 15 soon, and my daughter is almost 12. So we've been doing that. I guess we'd started out homeschooling, home educating, and then found our way somehow into unschooling, self-directed learning. And that's been over 8 years now. We started out as world schoolers. We decided to leave the school system to travel with our kids. And to be honest, we did it because we just thought this will fit our schedule the best. This will allow us to be flexible and move and travel. And we just took it day by day, year by year. And it was kind of one of those gifts that we didn't expect, but we found ourselves in. Along that journey, I had so many questions and doubts and uncertainties and things I wanted to know. And I found as I met more families, they had the same ones. And so it led me to create my podcast, Honey, I'm Homeschooling the Kids, which is now in the 5th season. And on that podcast, we talk about unschooling, home education, alternative education, and it's also my way to support the community by providing a broader community, answering questions, providing research, information, and support as well. Along with that, I'm a public school board trustee from my local area. So that always brings interesting conversations between self-directed learning, unschooling, and public schooling. But it gives me some great background and understanding as well, especially when it comes to those questions around learning in comparison to school kids too. I've worked actually, I'm not an education major. My background is actually international business is what I studied. But I always kept finding myself back to education, whether it was private education, supporting public education. I've worked for private schools. I've taught English overseas, run project-based learning classes. So, that's where I've always found myself back to. And other than that, unschooling is the other question. What is unschooling to us, or to me, you would ask, Judy? Unschooling, I think, really is a way of learning, of supporting the individual learner. I believe that learning is really an intrinsic practice. It's something that is very internal as well. And it's not, you can absolutely still have a teacher or classes, but it's something that's directed by the learner, chosen by the learner. So it's not an authoritarian top down, I choose what you're learning, I tell you what to do, I plan everything for you. It's learner directed, learner supported. It's not curriculum that you have to follow. You can use curriculum, but again, it's supporting the child, supporting the learner. And that's really, I think, the basis of unschooling. And as a parent, we're a support alongside of our child. It's not unparenting. It's not just going crazy and wild and everyone, it's a free for all. I find it's actually really based on connection and the relationship in order to support the learner so they have autonomy, relatedness, connection, and that in their learning. So I'll pass it over to you now, Judy.
Thanks, Robin. So my name is Judy Arnall, and I have 5 kids, 5 children. They're all adults now. This is them, my gang. So when they were in grade 2 or 3, I pulled them out, the 2 oldest boys, to homeschool. And then by about November that year, they stopped listening to me and not doing their work. And I became the yelling parent I didn't want to become, because my career is I teach parents about non-punitive parenting and child development. So then we let go of the schoolwork and we unschooled all the way to about high school. And and then in high school, they did a self-directed learning program and kind of did the government curriculum, but how they chose to do it, it depended on each subject. So they all got diplomas, they all got Alexander Rutherford scholarships, university entrance scholarships. 3 went to university and graduated. 1 is still in 3rd year university, and 1 is deciding what he wants to do for his life. So that's my kids. And then my work is I've written 3 books on non-punitive parenting and child development. And then I decided, hey, I want to do a book on unschooling, because when my kids, my 3 oldest, all went to university the same year, pretty well. Trying to pay for 3 kids in university at the same time is unbelievable. But a lot of their friends went at the same time too, who were unschoolers. And I thought, this information has got to get out there, because there's not a lot of literature on unschooling there, and kids going to colleges, universities, but massive amounts of kids going, not just an anomaly or an outlier, but kids do go. And so I wrote this book, Unschooling to University, and I have a blog by the same name. So a lot of what I talk about is in the book. Of course, the whole section today on literacy is in that section under elementary school age. But it all boils down to child development. And I think once you know what goes on with the brain, what processes are happening that children are learning, you understand how unschooling works. So my definition of unschooling is it is learner chooses it all. When, how, where, who, and if. They decide what they're going to learn and everything else about that. And the beauty of that is there's 61 benefits, which I cover in my book, but the beauty is there is no motivation problems. If there's any motivation problems, it's not unschooling or learner centered. They have to take it on themselves. So that's kind of it. And welcome everybody. So I do want to say today, in talking about literacy, I am not very well versed in children with special needs, although I had one myself. But I focus most of child development on neurotypical children. So I don't know if Golda and Robin can add to that, but we're, you know, the neurotypical workings of the brain are what studies are done on, but also studies on children with non-neurotypical learning challenges. Then we're not professionals, so maybe take what we say today, but also apply it to your own situation.
Yeah, I would definitely say I'm an education, I have a master's degree in education, but it wasn't in literacy, and I didn't study literacy at all, except I got interested in it because my son was completely unable to learn to read when he was in grade 3. He still hadn't learned to read. So I understand this struggle, but I don't think that I could have, we specifically are mentioning this because someone asked us about dyslexia, and we're not experts. And I would really suggest somebody do an educational psychology review if you're able to do that with somebody who is an expert, because an educational psychology review isn't just like them telling you what's wrong. They also tell you what to do about it. So they have all the strategies that the child, to meet the child's needs, specifically if they're struggling with things like that. So I'm not trying to not answer the question. I do think that even dyslexic children, from what I've read, can learn to read, but it's really it really just takes different strategies, and we don't know what those are. There's lots of different ones for different people, just like anything. So educational psychology reviews would be really helpful for anybody who's struggling with that. And don't be so quick to think that they have dyslexia just because they can't read at grade 3, for example, either, because that's not necessarily the problem. Sometimes people just aren't ready to learn to read yet in grade, until later. So that's kind of my advice to that specific question that we got earlier this week. So yeah, and please feel free to write the questions in the chat box, because we are going to be answering them today. This is a Q&A. I did find some strategies though, and this website here when I was researching that question this week. So there's some strategies, and there's also a bunch of programs out there that helps dyslexic children to read. And there's just different ways. So I think the first thing when you're unschooling is to know that they have to decide they want to read, because that's the most important factor in anything like that. And then once they want to learn to read, then you can move forward with teaching them strategies in order to help them learn to read. So there's dyslexia.com. There's a whole bunch of websites out there. This was actually an article I found with actual strategies and with actual programs and with other things that lead to the diagnosis of dyslexia, not just not being able to read. So yeah.
Okay.
And we have another question: how does unschooling fit with a dyslexic teenager? And so I think that's the same thing. If they're struggling to read, there's specific strategies that I don't have full knowledge of. So I would really recommend going to somebody who is an expert, which is an educational psychologist, who can give you those strategies and let you know how to move forward. because you can learn to read when you're dyslexic. You just have to do it. They have to do it differently. So if they're interested in learning to read and they want to do better, then there's ways to figure out how to do that.
And I also just want to add, because I think this usually comes up, and I know that Judy and Golda and myself will, because I'm sure we'll talk about it, it will come up. If we're talking about things like strategies in unschooling, you know, maybe we don't have specific strategies where we say, well, on Mondays you should do this, on Wednesdays you should do this for a certain amount of hours, but it's very much about creating the environment. And offering an environment of literacy. And I also want to talk the difference between just learning to read and what literacy is, because literacy is not just learning to read. So we can talk more about that today, and also how it looks in our homes, others that we know, and how we are able to create an environment of literacy in the unschooling and self-directed learning framework.
Okay. Golda, did you want to read the questions out, or?
Yeah,
okay.
I can do that. So there was a comment, we have become a society of quick labeling and quick fixes. That was just a comment. And then also someone asked, once a child expresses an interest in learning to read, what is the best way to do that without a traditional phonics program? Who would like to go first? Judy, what did you do?
Okay. Okay, what did I do? Sorry, I want to share a slide because I think I'm going to start with the brain, if you don't mind. I'm on a new computer right now, so I'm like, it's very slow. Anyways, when my kids started, they were on video games. They were playing StarCraft, and it was my 7-year-old and my 6-year-old, and they wanted to read so much because they wanted to write in the cheat codes to get further in the game. And they kept calling me over for me to come in and type in the cheat codes. So I still remember those cheat codes to this day. It was like power overwhelming, Operation Seawall for those of you whose kids play StarCraft. But I had to do that until they really, really, really wanted to read, to play games. Games like Zelda and Ocarina of Time, all those video games require a lot of reading. And it's very hard to play them. And I wouldn't be sitting there telling them what to read because I had other things to do. I had a toddler and a preschooler underfoot. So it's like, okay, you have to. So they really wanted to learn. But I want to just talk about reading. Reading, as much as kids want to learn to read, it's a brain developmental task. Things have to work right for it to click, for them to crack the code. And it's very much ingrained in each child's developmental spacing. So just as we know that all children toilet train at different times because, you know, more the bottom parts have to work together with the brain. Same with reading. It's the worldwide average age to read is around age 7. So when children lose their 2 front teeth, that's probably the age that their brain's working together to help them to read. And when we talk about the brain, we say, obviously, it's sight. So the occipital lobe and the temporal lobe is when they're starting to understand language, first memories, they're speaking very well, and the parietal lobe, which is recognizing letters, and letters have sounds, and then putting it all together. So these 3, the yellow, the green, the red part of the brain, all have to work together in order for a child to crack the code. And because most children learn to read anywhere from age 4 to age 12, the average is 7. Most kids learn to read while in school. So schools often take the credit. Yeah, we taught them how to read. Well, no, not really. They didn't. Kids are going to learn to read in and out of schools. So I don't know any unschoolers that do not know how to read by age 12, because we live in a very literal society. And as long as language and books are around us, kids are going to pick it up and learn to read. Okay, Robin, over to you.
Okay, so let me just going to go back to the question. Was on best way to do that without a traditional phonics program. Okay, so for my kids here, my son went to school until the middle of grade 1. I worked at the school that both of my kids had first started attending, and it happened that the school that they attended was a well-known school for its literacy program. The kids started at age 3. They went to school full-time from age 3, age 4, kindergarten full-time. So my son actually had phonics introduction from the school from age 3 at school. But so I knew I was very well versed in that particular phonics program. I worked with it within the school as well. And we did workshops for parents outside of the school hours in that program too. But my daughter, she went for half of the school year when she was age 3, because when my son was 6, my daughter was 3 is when we started traveling with them. So this is how I actually look at it. My son started with that program. My daughter, yes, she started with that program for a few months, but at home, what we had done, because the program actually was it involved actions, it involved songs, it involved movement, it involved touch. There was actually sensory books with it as well. It involved all of the senses except for taste, I guess, in learning to read in that phonics program. So because I also knew the program well and understood how it involved all of the senses, we actually had it at home. We sang the songs from when my kids were really little, because I was already working at that school and knew that program. So we had the CDs at that time. They would sing the songs, we would do the actions. It was part of our, rhythms in the day, even before they attended school. The other thing as well is my husband and I are big readers ourselves. And from the moment our kids were conceived, essentially they were in my womb, we actually started reading to them every night when I was pregnant. Whether it was myself, I'd read out loud, or my husband would read to the kids in my womb. That became a daily practice that we would do every evening before we went to bed. And it continued for years and years and years. We actually switched. We do more reading. We still read out loud in our home, even though my oldest is a teenager and my daughter is getting close to that. We read out loud in the mornings now, but that was something that we always did. So we really created an environment of literacy where the kids would see us reading. We would read out loud to them. We would talk about, we would read books and then watch movies on it. We had conversations about it. We involved it in our world. And many times there were times where we watched a movie and then we would discover the book and be excited to read the book together. We didn't have, the interesting thing I found though, is with that program that my son went to, the school he went to, they had a lot of homework and it was a lot of work as well. So what I saw a little bit of before we left is that, we would end up doing homework on weekends, like Sunday morning, because it would be last minute and he would have to have it due on Monday. So it started to become something that was uncomfortable, and it was like dragging him to the table to finish his work so it would be done for Monday. And that was already when he was young. We saw that we didn't want it to be something that was that he disliked. We want it still to be something that he enjoyed and found comfortable and not pressing all the time. So we, really tried to make it part of our evening routine where we sat on the couch and we had, blankets and we're cozy, and it was about comfort, not about pressure. And that was the way that, for reading for my kids, how it really started. So I could say my son used that phonics program. My daughter was introduced to it, but then she was immersed in that environment already. So from fairly young, she started to pick it up because she already knew all the songs. We would have books. She would, bring books for reading time. We would use audiobooks and At that time, when we were living in Jamaica first, we didn't have very much access to books. So we used Apple Books at that time, and we found a lot of books that they could touch the page to turn and it would read to them. So we just tried our best to create an environment of literacy and making it one of comfort and enjoyment instead of one of pressure and away from enjoyment. So. Does that make sense? Does that answer the question? So I guess it was a little bit of both for my kids in that way.
And for my son, so my daughter went to school right up to high school and grade 12. So, and she's 24 now. But my son, who is now 12, I took him out in the middle of grade 3. Mostly because of his mental health issues that he was experiencing at the time, post-traumatic stress disorder, and he couldn't go to school anymore. But also because I knew from kindergarten that he was one of those kids that weren't ever going to like school. You know, he got the wiggle seat on the first day of kindergarten when we came back to Canada. He never fit in. And I've seen kids as a high school teacher like that. Like they start off in kindergarten like that. By the time they get to grade 10, they hate school and they're just like going through the motions, and they don't understand why they have to do it, and it's not useful to them, but their parents make them go anyway. And I didn't want that to be him. I was really worried about that, even when he was younger. But when I took him out in the middle of grade 3, he had been tested by a program that teachers like to use here called Fontes and Pinnell. And he had tested at a low grade 1 level. So he was in a special literacy program in school. And he had declared to me that he was never going to learn to read because he thought it was stupid and he didn't like it and it was boring and he didn't understand why he had to do it. So he had basically refused to learn to read and had dug in his little heels. And I would like to say that he was part of a literacy rich life like Robin has, but I was a single parent and I didn't always have time to read to him. And so I kind of worried about that when he was in grade 3, but I had read by then all of the literature on how kids teach themselves how to read. I didn't really believe it yet, but I had read about it and I thought, what if he would I think he needs to decide he wants to. And we were in a bookstore one day and he picked up this book and he could read enough to read the title, and the title was How to Become a Witch. And he said, "You can learn to become a witch from a book in a bookstore?" And I said, "That's what books are for, Brogan. That's what they're for. They're teaching us how to do things that we don't know how to do." And he goes, "You can learn anything from a book in a bookstore?" I was like, "Yeah, there's a lot of things you can learn from books." And then he put the book down and said, "Well, I need to learn how to read," because I don't think his brain at the time had known that what books were for, and suddenly he realized what they were for, that you can actually learn how to do things by reading the words of other people. And he was reading probably within 3 months, and I didn't teach him. I actually took him back to be tested again with the same program, Fontes and Pinnell. And the teacher who had tested him at the beginning of the year said, "What did you do?" I said, "Nothing. I didn't do anything. He decided he wanted to learn to read because he realized what reading was for." And so within a few months, he was reading fairly fluently at grade level. And he now chooses to read even sometimes, especially if it's a high interest book for him. He's very stubborn though. He won't read things that he doesn't find value in. I can understand that, I guess, as a human being, not reading something. I've had courses that I've had to take for university to get my degree that I just painfully boring. And I had to force my monkey brain to wrestle it into listening to the book because I just didn't understand why I had to learn it. But so anyway, he struggled to read. And I've heard that from other parents. So it's not just me, because I'm a homeschool facilitator. I've actually heard other parents talk about that now when they switch to unschooling and let go of the idea that they're going to control the outcome and that they're going to decide when their child learns to read or whatever. I've had people say, wow, as soon as they decided to learn to read, they just could read. It was like learning to talk or something. I said, yeah, it's a developmental stage. They just weren't ready before that. And also, I think as a human being, you have to decide you want to learn something. So the traditional phonics program is great if you're trying to introduce concepts before a child is ready, because you're teaching them strategies ahead of time. But I don't think it works until they buy in and want to do it. So that's my main point, is that any human being needs to buy into the learning process if you want them to learn to do something like reading. And I don't think there's too many people that are illiterate that didn't, like, aside from people who have had reading difficulties and have not been taught strategies, it would be very difficult to be in our society and not ever learn to read. It's almost impossible. Literacy is everywhere. Everything that we do now is text-based, and you have to text, you have to read in video games, you have to read to do anything. Like it would be a stretch, I think, for someone to grow up with a functional family and a functional life and not read. I can't imagine that happening.
Yeah.
I just want to add too, I didn't really tell you about my kids, but I would add to Robin's conversation that just having a home full of books, taking your kids to the library, definitely we read to our teenagers too, all the way. That wasn't my job, that was husband's job, because I hate reading out loud. But those, and not just, and having a variety of reading. So graphic novels, video game manuals, literature, having a whole bunch of newspapers, magazines, whatever, just having those in your house is really good, that kids, get to enjoy a whole variety of texts. Until we have more questions, I just wanted to show you another thing from a PowerPoint, is that so I'm going to just show you this slide here. So
Judy, I want to add something else to it too, and after you.
Sure. So my kids learned to read at age 8. So that was my oldest. He had a learning disability. He had working memory issues. He had ADHD. When he was in school, he felt stupid because he could not read. When I brought him home that year, it just started working for him. The next child read at 6, and then my daughter read at 4. Now, she's just one of those kids that are naturally talented at spelling, grammar, writing, that it's never been taught to her. She has never had a formal English class. So for English 30, she wrote 4 essays for her facilitator, wrote the diploma exam, and they called it a class. Done. She went to university and took a degree in English. And she said, Mom, they're teaching me stuff I already taught myself when I was 13. So now she's written 5 novels. But that's her thing. She loves reading. She loves writing. She constantly does it. Whereas the boys, and I hate to be gender stereotyped here, but of my 4 boys, I would say 2 of them love reading and continue to read. 2 of them, anything from Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand to Shakespeare to Betty Friedan. And 2 of my boys do not like reading. They can read, but they choose to watch YouTube or learn through videos. So personality figures that in too, but all children can read. And I just want to say too, so my 2 youngest sons were late readers. They didn't read until age 9 and 10. In school, they would have been grade 4 at grade 5 and definitely in a remedial program. But keeping them home, not freaking out, gave them back their confidence that they were going to get it at some point and it was going to be good. And just to show you, the late reader at age 10 this is what he's reading. He's reading books like this at 17 for fun, right? So again, once they get it, they can read a lot of materials and they learn it. And I just want to, before we leave reading, I just want to remind you that in Alberta, the English language arts curriculum, it seems that there's such a heavy emphasis on reading and writing, but it's actually divided into 6 broad outcomes: reading, writing, speaking, listening, viewing, and representing. And we don't put enough emphasis on the speaking part, especially public speaking, I think, and especially the listening part too. We do a bit on the viewing and representing, but most of the marks in those senior high school English courses come from reading and writing. And when you're homeschooling, you can adjust the percentages of those outcomes. We gave each outcome 16.6% of the final mark in English high school, just to put that out there. And I also wanted to say, even in grade 12, they're still being taught how to write a 5-paragraph essay, but we'll get into that when we get into writing. Robin, you wanted to add something to reading.
Yeah, it's interesting because, you know, and I think this is a conversation as well that's going to expand into the next part, into writing as well, into literacy. I actually just kind of brush up on a bit of reading before this as well. And I took some of my books that were kind of the traditional supporting reading ideas from written by teachers that use it in their classroom. And then I took others from Self-Determination, like Peter Gray. I reread some of his Free to Learn and Gina Riley that had kind of the academic experience and ideas in unschooling or self-directed learning. And it was also interesting because, for example, Peter Gray, a lot of Free to Learn is based on democratic schooling and independent self-directed learning. And he had talked about how in one of their studies with Sudbury Valley School, one year they actually, what they noticed over the years was a change in literacy levels of the kids that attended the school. And the difference that they noted when they went back and interviewed others, and because many of the founders have been there from the very beginning and they're still there now. And they said what the noted difference from them was actually our advancement in technology. The difference was the kids who were playing more video games, they were texting, they were involved in other forms of media that earlier on they hadn't been. And this had just opened themselves up into a new world of practicing literacy in many ways. And again, literacy is the, and this is one of the other things I got from Unschooling, Exploring Learning Beyond the Classroom, talking about literacy was literacy isn't just being able to read, instead is creating a culture where words are valued, whether those words are in written form or are in other forms such as audiobooks or storytelling or in other graphic forms as well. So that was one of the interesting, I kind of put a star beside that they had found was the difference in increased practice just because of the available access to technology that they found in literacy. And then the other part, of course, was the mixed ages and how they found when kids are around more mixed ages as well, they see the older peers doing things, but even things like socio-dramatic play was a big thing that they credited to it, acting things out and, pretending they're cooking and they're getting out the recipe book and trying to read the recipes. Or now we have YouTube and then, following the recipes on that way and then referencing it back and then reading what's on the package. Is this the right chocolate chips? Yes, it is. Okay. That what we have now is also just growing that environment of literacy as well. So I don't think that's actually what I wanted to add, but that's just what came to me now. So I'll pass it back over to you two.
I was thinking about the reason why my son said he didn't want to learn to read. It was because he was in one of those remedial classes and he had gotten the impression from that he was dumb. And nobody likes to feel like they're dumb. It doesn't matter who they are or how old they are. If you make someone feel dumb about something, they're going to try to resist it because they don't want to feel that way. And I think that's a big problem in our school system is for some kids, they start way too young. And so by the time they get to the place where they might actually be able to read, now they've developed a resistance to reading because it makes them feel bad about themselves and they don't like that feeling. So they learn that activity makes me feel this way. And so it's an interesting thing though, when I was learning about reading and how people learn to read, how many stages there are. Like when you see a little person sitting down pretending to read a book, even though they're not reading the words, they're just like making up a story. That's actually that's a stage in literacy development. Like they got the idea that books are full of stories and they might not be able to read the story yet, but they know what it's for. So that's good. There's lots of different there. We do have another question though. Do you want to move to the next one, or Judy, do you have anything to add? The next one is our eldest daughter is, I think, what you could say a whole word reader. She reads a lot of Calvin and Hobbes, amongst other comics and graphic novels, and so reads a lot of large words. Recently, though, she told me and my partner that she wants to learn to spell, or is not good at spelling, or needs to go to school because I need to learn to spell. It's quite interesting to hear, and she hasn't said this about other things, and she's repeated it a few times. Well, not that much really, but I'm wondering if these kinds of questions from a child learning resonate and naturally prompt a response from you. I've had actually that my own son say the same thing. He got mad at me because I misspelled. He was texting his friend and he asked me to do it and I misspelled the word, and he was furious because now he's going to think I'm stupid and I don't want you to text my friends anymore because you're not careful enough. I never even thought of that because I already know I'm not stupid, so I don't think that that's going to make me look bad. But he really, really felt that way himself. So who wants to go first though?
I can comment a little bit to it. Yeah, it's interesting. I guess part of my question as well, just to get a little bit of context, is how her reference to that question as well, that she needs to go to school because I need to learn to spell. Where did she hear that from, or has it been mentioned by someone else that she knows that that's the place, or just from movies or TV or anything like that? I actually think of my son, and I remember one year, and this is not for reading, but it was actually for math. And we had never, okay, right. You may have heard it from a friend that goes to school. Okay. We had never really done any formal math curriculum or anything like that. And at one point he was a little bit upset, and I asked him, what was going on or what he was feeling. And he told me that he was really worried because he didn't know any math, and his cousin, who's actually the same age as him, he was upset because he felt that she knew a lot more math than he did because she went to school. And so he was really concerned about that. So we had a conversation about it, and I asked him what he wanted to know or felt like he didn't know or needed to know, and he couldn't really quite say. But in the end, really, we just talked about, I said, we have the time, and if you want to learn a little bit more, then if there's math that you want to do, if you want to do the same math as your cousin, we can do that. The great thing is, really, it's up to you, and I'll help you with that. I'm here to help you if you want me to help you with that. And if there's a certain program, or we can look for something that if you want, but if you feel that you're behind and you want to get ahead, we can certainly do that because we have the time and space to do that. So I can help you with that. And he was really open to it because, he was the one driving this, right? He felt that he wanted to learn a bit more math. So that's when he first started using Khan Academy. And we used Khan Academy for that year. And then I think he did that grade level. He did it all. And then when he was done that grade level, he was like, okay, I'm good. He was satisfied. And we actually he didn't pick up any other formal math like that until years later. But he was satisfied that at that point, he knew enough. I don't know if he went and quizzed his cousin and felt that he then knew more than her. I have no idea. I actually didn't follow up to really, find out what it was that solidified it for him. But I think probably in doing the practice too, he realized that he could do that and that we were there to support him in it. So that was just my little experience I don't know if that answered your question enough, but that was just a little bit of my personal story with that I saw.
So in our house, my kids hated doing workbooks. The school sent them to us, and they were grammar workbooks, spelling workbooks. The kids did one page and started crying. and we just put them away because, and maybe we should talk about this, because the new draft curriculum is putting an emphasis on knowledge rather than skills in some areas. And I found my kids learn to spell through writing, and they learn to read through reading. They learn to write through writing. And they probably didn't really know what an adjective was. They used adjectives in their writing, but they didn't know the word adjective probably until high school. And believe me, they cover it all again in high school. Well, right now with the existing curriculum, that may change. But and I know a lot of my kids learn to write and spell through video games. So I think they played this one game called Grail or Smallwood. And if they misspelled something, they were penalized in the game. So it kind of motivated them. And there's that motivation word again, Golda, to look things up. This was before we had automatic spell checkers. So a lot of if your daughter wants to go to school and learn to spell, I let my kids try out school. I sent my daughter in grade 3. She went for 3 months, found out she wasn't really behind everybody, came home, decided to unschool again. So sometimes they need to see that for themselves, but also that spelling comes, and there's people who are naturally good spellers. They really are. Like my daughter, who's, really literate, very, very much focused on writing. She's an awesome speller. For the rest of us, we use tools. And thank goodness now we have all these tools. We have, I was watching my son use a citation app for his university essay the other day. I think the point is we need to focus on kids really getting a handle of where their sources are from and naming their sources and citing their sources, but how they do it, we have tools for doing that. The other thing too in writing is that when I went to university 30 years ago, the average essay that I was supposed to write would have been about 15 to 30 pages. Nowadays, my 4 kids who went to university, average essay is around 800 to maximum 2,000 words. So writing overall is being less emphasized in our society. You can tell that because YouTube is the #1 place where people go for information now. They want to see it rather than read it. So, I wouldn't stress about giving your kids workbooks to learn to spell, learn to do grammar. Get them writing. And I want to show you, here is an example of my son's writing at age 11. Now tell me, there we go. Wow, eh? Now, this is age 11. So you can see he, nothing is very well, it's not in lines, it's not beautiful cursive. Let me talk about cursive too. Misspelling here, right? Some letters are backwards still. Do I correct any of that? Not a chance. I am not correcting anything. If he wants help correcting it, yes, I will absolutely help him out. But what he did, oh yeah, there's that backwards 3. He notices other people's writing. He reads, he picks it up. Children learn to read by reading. Children learn to write when they have the passion to say something. So I'd love to show you a piece of his writing today. It looks a lot better than this, but again, it was all self-taught. He figured it out. And I'd have to say the same with all 5 of my kids. Here's an example of, okay, so this is my son who is 2nd year university. In university, he could not bring laptops to exams. Actually, none of my kids could. So not learning cursive was a big detriment to them. So like unschooling is, when they need to know something, they learn it. So he got out a grade 1 reader and a workbook on how to make letters. And this was September. I can't even read this, his poor professor. This was by December, which is a lot better. So when the will is there, kids work on it. They want to do things, they want tools to do better, they will do it. And this is for probably 4 of my boys all learned cursive. The daughter still didn't learn cursive. She just used block letters for her exams, and a lot of the exams in university are timed. So it was a bit of a handicap for them, but it couldn't have been too much of a handicap, or she would have learned to write faster. So don't worry, it will come.
And can I add to that too? And I remember from my kids' old school, the one that I worked in too, and this is something that Judy, you just said, that I remember that the staff and the belief around this particular writing program is they said the same thing. When kids were writing, they never corrected the spelling. Actually, that was kind of the rule at the school, was that you just let the kids write because you want them to write. You don't correct, because what would happen is if they started correcting them, the kids would be concerned with getting things right all the time, and they stopped writing and they limited their writing, while they just wanted them to be able to freely write as much as they could. And they would actually give a lot of time for kids just to write. And so, you know, I remember them, and I remember one teacher saying that, and I think she was a grade 4 or 5 teacher. She wasn't a fan of spelling tests or spelling lists because she felt they were, for the kids, they were not real. They did not, they did not offer realistic learning, because usually there were words that, you took out from the curriculum or that she had created that had no meaning to the kids many times. So they'd memorize it, but then again, repeating it and using it, it was so little that she felt she had more value with just letting them free write or create or build or do other things as well. So that just triggered my memory in that now when you said that as well, Judy. So
my son was actually really wanted to learn to spell this year. He decided at the beginning of the year, because he doesn't want people to think he's dumb when he's texting. So he said, I need to learn to spell better because I know I'm not good at that. So it's kind of the same. He's in grade 6, or he's at the age of grade 6, I should say. So we actually looked into spelling programs out there, and he picked one. So we went through the books, the workbooks. So he wanted to, though. That was the difference. So he picked Spelling UC, and we got him one of the workbooks, and then he's learning to spell. And we even talked about, because there's online spelling bees now, like where you can challenge yourself and challenge other people and things like that. So there's lots of different ways to do that from home too. But yeah, Judy, like Judy said, the only thing Judy her kids might have wanted to try school for 3 months, but my son already was at school, and there's no way he's going. I threaten him with it when I'm mad. That's what if you don't behave yourself, I'm gonna have to send you back to school. So anyway, he's got no desire to go to school whatsoever. And he doesn't actually think it's going to help him because it didn't before, right? So he has a different perspective on that. But there's nothing wrong with going and trying school and seeing that the kids aren't quite as like, I think that when you're away from it, you think that it's some kind of idealistic situation. I think parents feel that way too, actually, because I talk to parents sometimes, and I say, I don't know what you think a classroom is like, but not everybody is able to do the same things at the same time. Like, there is a huge variety of abilities in a classroom, from very low to very high. And your child, even if they go back to school, for example, because this is a conversation we have around this time of the year, there's no such thing as behind. Like, there's always just a really varying ways, and a good teacher will be able to differentiate their instruction. That's changing instruction so that all of the kids can access the new education or knowledge or whatever. That's what they're supposed to be able to do. So we have this idealistic view of what school is, and so do kids when they're not actually there. But if they actually go, they'll see there's the kids behind and then there's kids ahead. Usually notice the ones ahead first, but yeah, eventually.
Yeah. And I also want to add too that, from parent, my oldest is not a strong speller. So he's almost 15 and he's not a big writer. It's not really his thing that he likes to do. He's not a strong speller. Ironically, my husband's a writer. So you would think we would all be these huge writers, but we're not. My daughter is. She really and very, she just likes to write stories on her own. She just goes on her own and just writes. She goes in her bedroom, she writes in her journal and different things like that. But one of the things that my husband had also said was, he was like, don't worry, we can get Grammarly. No problem at all. That will help any of the spelling. So yeah, there's so many tools now that we can use that are accessible to help support that too. So
I want to add too, when I went to university, I failed my first year English class because my professor was Warren Kinsella, and he's a very noted author who wrote Shoeless Joe. And I still have the essay he gave back to me with a D- on it. And he wrote on it, English must be a second language to you. And ouch. And then, 4 books later, I have to say I have the ideas, but I'm not a naturally good writer, as many of you probably see my posts on Facebook, but I have a very awesome editor. And that's what you need.
So someone commented, you reminded me of being a kid and playing a computer game as well, where you had to write the incantations of a spell and you had to transcribe it from a physical book written in cursive. And if I even got a comma out of place, boom, instant death. I'm a great speller, yes, self-professed, but now I wonder if that didn't prompt me to do so. I think I actually, my son's learning what adjectives and verbs and nouns are from a game called Scribble Knots, because it's like you get a magic book and you have to solve puzzles by writing and you have to get the spelling right or it doesn't work. And also it'll ask you for an adjective or a noun instead of telling you what that is. So he's learned just from playing a video game, all of the basic grammar things that I would teach in grade 9. Someone else wrote, my son likes to type stories on the computer. Spell check automatically corrects quite a bit of his spelling, but not all. We only tell him how to spell something if he comes and asks us. His punctuation, however, is non-existent. His stories are pretty well pages of one long sentence. It's incredibly painful to read, but I'm trying hard to leave it alone unless he asks. So that's one of the comments.
That's good.
My daughter yeah, okay, go ahead. You can comment.
No, I think that's great. You want to keep them writing. You want them they can learn how to edit later, but yes, get the ideas out and encourage that as much as you can. One thing too with my kids is they love to write video game stories. So they would draw the picture and then I would scribe for them the story and write down what they told me. And what they told me wasn't proper grammar or anything. I just kept writing, and they would cringe if they read those now, but it's the process.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I did I think last year is he was on what was the name of that app? It was like an app, but you were making a cartoon, and I wanted him to understand what beginning, middle, and end of a story was, like how stories are structured, but I didn't want to expressly teach it because then he'll decide he doesn't want to write it and he won't do it. So he started reading other people's stories though. So he had a story like, this is my mom and this is what she does. And it wasn't a story. It was just like a collection of ideas. And I didn't say anything. And he started reading other people's stories and he said, why are theirs better than mine? Like that mine, I can see that mine sucks compared to these other people's stories. And I said, oh, they have a beginning, middle, and end to their story. And he's like, oh. So actually he created his own stories with a beginning, middle, and end just because he noticed over time that his was lacking something and he didn't know what it was. And then he asked me and I told him. That was what it reminded me of actually, is that moment in time when it was like a light bulb moment where he was, oh, that's what it is. Yeah, right. Yeah. There's another one. My daughter in grade 3 will not write. She's an absolute perfectionist. And like Robin just described, won't write for fear of spelling things wrong. How can I encourage her to write freely? I already do not correct her. We read together daily. She went to public school until this year. So I think the fear of being wrong stems from that experience. Does anyone want to comment? Sure, go ahead, Jody.
Well, with 4 boys who trying to get them to write is like pulling teeth. I think again too, kids, when they have a passion to write, it comes out right freely. When they have to write about something they don't want to write about, like a book report or something they're forced to write, then it can be a real problem. One of the things I did with my kids is I put them in front of a laptop and I covered the screen so they couldn't see what they were writing. I put paper or cardboard or something in there, and they just was on the keyboard putting together their words. That really helped. Another thing I tried was got them to record their thoughts. And then there's a lot of software out there, Google, that will translate speech to text. That really helped. We used Dragon for my son who had a learning disability, and it really helped him. By the way, when he got to university, and Golda, I was going to ask you, when kids are writing the English 30 diploma exam on computers, is spell check installed? Can they know? Oh, okay. So they are marked on that then. Yeah, because when they get
actually, they're not marked on spelling. That's not one of the things. And if they are, it's just a small portion of the mark. It's not. So they mark it with a rubric, and it's weighted differently. And spelling, if it's marked at all, is not up there. And that's true of all standardized tests actually for English language arts. Is grammar and spelling is only a portion of the mark, and it's not usually a very big portion, because they're most English teachers, of which I was one, high school English teacher, they're not looking for perfection in ability and skill in the mechanics of writing. That's actually one of the homeschool program's biggest faults, is that they don't emphasize ideas. They emphasize the mechanics of writing, the grammar, the punctuation, the parts of speech. But when you get to high school, they don't care about that as much anymore. They want to see ideas, because English classes are focused on ideas, big ideas, other people's ideas, different ways of looking at things. So perspective, that kind of thing. So the emphasis in high school is not on spelling or grammar, or shouldn't be. If it is, if there's a teacher out there that's teaching it like that, and they're doing it wrong, in my opinion.
I found that in university too, or watching my kids in university. It's definitely get your ideas out, reflect on things. What's your opinion? If you're citing someone, where's your source? Name your sources. That's what are the big parts of marks in university. So, but as I was saying with my son with learning disabilities, once he got to university, he got funding for scribes, for textbooks that were read to him, a lot of supports. And the funding went right to him, right for what he needed. It didn't go to the whole class like it does in K to 12. So it's a lot better at post-secondary.
And can I just add something to this comment as well? I just wanted to say that the person that wrote it sounds like I would keep doing what you're doing. I wouldn't actually try and get her to write any more than she is, especially if the biggest concern is if she gets it perfect, or if she's trying to spell things correctly. And you said you do not correct her and you read together daily. I think that's the greatest thing. You know, part of it is also, if you're reading together daily, read to her, hearing the intonations, seeing how it's laid out on the page, that is still all connected with writing as well. Telling stories orally, that's still connected to writing too. So there's so many other parts of writing and storytelling that go along with that I think it's really important to support. And you can do that naturally in your daily life without worrying about spelling. And also, she's only in grade 3. So I wouldn't even worry about spelling. And if she is more concerned about getting it right, getting it on the page in that way, just don't force it on her. Don't make her feel like she has to do that. Just let her, if she wants to write and create, then let her do that. But I wouldn't make it a task that she feels she has to fulfill. Let her direct that and just immerse her in other things that still are part of that circle that add to the literacy. So just let it flow naturally.
And one of the things I always suggest when I'm facilitating is also, if they choose to do any writing, make it real life, like not something that's disconnected from real life. So letters is a great way, getting them like just something that's real to them, something that's for a reason to them. So there's a connection. And I think eventually that fear of not being perfect will go away. That is a side effect of going to school, I think, because there's a real emphasis in schools on doing things perfectly and right, or else it's wrong. Like there's no middle ground. So there's no, and until high school, they don't emphasize ideas. They emphasize perfection and writing techniques and skills, and even letters, like how their letters are formed and everything. So there's a reason that she's reacting that way to that. There's another, we should move on because we only have 20 minutes left. What's your thoughts on this? Thoughts on a daughter who thinks the only way to have friends is through school. We try to attend what few homeschool gatherings are allowed due to COVID, and she truly feels it's not how she wants to make friends. She otherwise enjoys all aspects of unschooling, but for the socialization wants to go to school. Not sure whether to cater to that need and re-register her back in school, or whether continue unschooling and let her learn friends don't just come from school.
It depends on the age, I would say. I would have to say about age 12, 13, a lot of homeschool and unschooled kids want to see friends more on a daily basis. That's kind of the stage they're in. So a lot, you lose a lot of homeschooled kids to school in the high school years because of that reason. But I think one of the best ways is to, you could send her let a lot of self-learning is that self-learning. I mean, we can tell our kids all we want that, friends come from everywhere, but sometimes they just need to learn these things themselves. So I would consider sending her. I remember when my daughter went back to school in grade 3, in grade 9, in grade 10, in grade 12, and she lasted 2 weeks to 2 months each time. And when she went to university, I thought, oh no, we're paying all this money and she's going to drop out after 2 months. But she didn't. But each time she learned something more about herself and life. Like she, going back in grade 9 was very difficult because the cliques were cemented. Grade 10 was a whole different because they mixed up all the kids. So if you're going to send her back, maybe send her back in those increments where the schools naturally break up the cliques, and kids are coming from other feeder schools like grade 7, grade 9, or grade 7, grade 10, those kinds of things, university.
Yeah, I agree with what Judy said as well. And it really does depend on the age. I know from my own experience, my daughter a couple of years ago, she talked about wanting to try going back to school. And she would have been, so it was probably about 2 years ago or more. And then the more we spoke about it, there were certain, like she wanted to play school sports, volleyball specifically. This was one of the things that she wanted to do that she found she wasn't able to do homeschooling. But she also said she didn't want to go back to school to try school until grade 7. So, which we thought she wasn't ready to do, and she voiced that she wasn't ready to do right now. So we just said, we'll support you. If you want to go back to school, that's okay. Also know that if you decide that it's not right for you, you can always come back to homeschooling. That's fine. But either way, whatever you do, we'll support you. The biggest thing that we were happy for, and I know I've told the story before, I don't know if it's in this Q&A, or I know Gold has heard the story before, is at first I was like, oh no, like I didn't do it right and they should be wanting to unschool. Oh, I thought I was doing something wrong, essentially. And then it was my husband who was like, no, we want our kids to be able to make the choices for themselves and recognize what they need and want. And she's communicating this to us. There's certain needs and wants that she has right now. And this is how she sees for her, it will be best fulfilled. So then it was like, oh yeah, that's right. Okay, that's why we're doing this. That's right. So yeah, we want to help support her on that. We don't this fall would be grade 7 for her. She's still undecided, actually. She was kind of like with COVID, she said she didn't want to go back to school. She has a lot of school friends. A lot of her best friend goes to school. So we'll see what happens. We just said either way, we'll support her. My son he talked about trying high school just because he wants to get a high school diploma, just because he wants to prove that he can get it. But he doesn't want to go to high school full time, is what he told us. He only wants to do some classes in high school. So it's the same. We're just trying to work with him how we can best support him. With him, it just turns out that high school, he has other interests and things that he does that just don't really fit into the schedule of high school. So now it's like, how do we help him to get his diploma if he wants to get his diploma within a very short amount of time? So yeah, so I think it's continuing. Goes back to the communication and relationship, and maybe there's certain things that she needs, and also the age as well. So just keep in good communication and be open to being able to try those things and learning for themselves.
Robin, I have a little Word document called the cheapest, fastest, easiest way to a diploma. I don't know if you've seen it, but I'll send it to you.
I haven't seen that one, so yeah, please do.
Yeah. There's another question. It says, I'm new to the concept of unschooling, so this might be a simplistic question. My teen is not interested in going to university. Without university as an end goal, so to speak, how do we navigate the next 4 years of schooling as an unschooler? Do we focus on things she's interested in learning and not worry about what we're trying to achieve, or work towards ? Sorry, I said that wrong.
I'll be quick and I'll say yes.
Yeah, what about you, Robin?
I'm just kind of rereading the question to myself. Without university as an end goal, so to speak, how do we navigate the next 4 years of schooling as an unschooler? Do we focus on things she's interested in? Okay, yeah, I agree. Absolutely. Focus on things that she's interested in. That's what unschooling is. And if she's interested, so if she is interested in going to university, I know sometimes there's that distinction. Is it us as the parents that are really kind of pushing an interest in university, or is it she's the one who has a big interest? If she is driving it, there's probably something she's seen at university that she wants to discover or learn or do. And most likely, if she knows that, her interests will probably align with that. So in helping her to support her interests, it might actually give her the experience and the knowledge and the information she needs for what she wants to pursue at university. The other thing as well is, because we just recently had this conversation too, university doesn't have to start at age 18 or 19. You can have world of experience and go to university at age 28 or 30 or later or younger. There's no absolute start and end date. And actually, it seems like the later you decide to go to university, the more options you have for entrance in university. You can go as a older student. Like there's different entrance requirements, especially past that high school age. So there's a bit more options for entry as well. And when you get to experience the world and see things for yourself, it also helps to narrow that down to when you go to university. I don't know how many of my friends started out in one degree, then switched the next year, then switched the next year. And then by the time in their 4th year, they did something completely different than what they thought they were going to in the beginning and then never did anything like that for their career, which I think is very common for many of us too. So
yeah, I just wanted to say too that I actually didn't go to university till I was 27 years old. And I didn't decide I wanted to be a teacher until then either. So I was a waitress and I worked at lots of different types of jobs. And I think most the reason that they actually don't have any high school requirements for when you're older is because people that are older who join university when they're later in age actually do better. I graduated summa cum laude because you don't have the same distractions, your brain's more developed, and you want to be there. Like, you're not just doing it because you're fulfilling some arbitrary requirement from your parents, but you actually want to. And Judy has something to say too, I think.
Me too. I didn't go till I was 25 and finished when I was 28. And I got in with a 60% average because high school was all about boys. And I finished with a really good GPA other than English. But yeah, there are so many more grants out there and for adults with that are going full time to colleges, tech schools, wherever. So there's no rush on it.
And just to go back to the original question too, I think that the world has changed significantly since I was 27, and that university is not necessary for success. It depends on what you want to be successful at. So I had to get a university degree because I had decided I wanted to become a teacher. But there are entrepreneurs out there with not even a high school diploma who are doing very well. And we all know about the stories about Google and who they're trying to recruit. They don't care about your high school diploma. They don't care what you learned in high school. They want to know what you've done. And they want to see a portfolio. They want to see what you're interested in because they want somebody who's creative. And I think a lot of our world problems right now are going to be solved by those creative thinkers who have been educated outside the box, or at least have thought outside the box, even if they weren't educated outside of it. So I think that's the thing, that the world has changed a lot, and we can get an education without getting a degree now. Like, you can go and take university courses for free in a massive open online course. And I know little kids that are in grade 5 taking what is that, paleontology courses from the University of Alberta, I think, because they're interested in paleontology. And she's taking a first year university course at grade 5 because she's interested. So I wouldn't worry too much if they're not steering themselves at this point towards university, because that will only, university is supposed to be a tool in order to get a job that you want. It's not necessarily going to make your life easier. So I think it's good to let them have time to decide. And there's lots of time. I started when I was 27. It's not going to end at age 18. It's not, this is not the only time in their life that they can learn things either. In fact, you can learn it faster and easier when you're older, I think, based on my own experience. We should move. We only have like 8 minutes left. So let's go to, a lot of this is validating for my older child, but I'm curious. My just turned 5-year-old doesn't know his alphabet or sounds and has no interest. My oldest knew all this info at this age. What say you? I know the piece about when the brain is ready, it will happen, or so is it just trust now? Who would like to answer that? Go ahead, Judy.
Okay, yes, it is trust. It's trust in your child's motivation to want to learn, and also in that his brain is going to develop to get to that point where it's going to click for him. When I was teaching parenting in the parenting world, I taught for Alberta Health Services, for U of C, and there's a lot of studies out there that show that if kids don't have reading and writing skills by the age of grade 3, they're on a trajectory for the rest of their life for a whole host of problems. And I would look at those studies, and one day it hit me that those studies are all done on kids that are in the school model. They're kids that are educated within institutions. And it's based on the fact that in school, children in grades 1 to 3 are learning to read because children in grades 4 to 12 are reading to learn. But at home, you don't have to present everything to your child through texts. They can learn through um, hands-on learning, through travel, through going to the science center, through physically, experientially learning. They do not have to learn everything that they would have learned in school in books through books at home. So, so the studies, I ignore the studies because they are not on children who are homeschooled or unschooled. And one time I did an informal survey on the Facebook group about 5 years ago, and I asked homeschooling families, I said, how many books does your child read in a year? So in school, in high school, children have to read one novel per grade per year. These homeschool kids read anything from 20 to 50 books and novels in a year. So their love of learning is growing in that they want to know more through reading, but they don't have to learn through reading. They can learn through YouTube, through lots of different ways. So I don't think I'd worry about it. The time to worry is if you have a 14-year-old who can't read. That is when I would start getting a psych ed assessment and seeing if they need help. They do not need intervention in the earlier years, but that's just my opinion.
I was thinking about those studies, Judy, because when I went to my master's program, we did look at those statistics too. Even and when you look at them, they're quite scary. Actually, it's not just about being a failure at life; it's also about ending up in prison and everything. Like there's a correlation between not. But the thing is, something that we also know in the school system is that the kids who don't learn to read in the younger grades often come from dysfunctional families that have a difficult time. They live in poverty. They have substance abuse issues, and so Judy often mentions the ACE, the adverse childhood experiences, and how that can lead to difficulty later in life. And I think if they looked at those ACEs instead of the reading, they'd probably find the same statistics, but for different reasons. Because we know in schools that the kids that can't read by grade 6 often come from dysfunctional and difficult homes. I'm not saying all of them, because there are kids with reading difficulties. And like Judy said, an educational psychology review can help you figure out what that is if there's a problem. And it also will give you a list of I'm talking 20-page list of strategies to use. They're really good at that. And it costs a bit of money, but it is worth it in the end, I think, to give you that list of strategies to help your child learn, especially if they're having difficulties, but only in the later grades. Like if they're in grade 2 and they can't read, that's probably because they're not ready yet. It's like trying to get a 6-month-old to walk when they're not ready to learn to walk yet. Good luck. That's not going to happen. You can do whatever you want. It's the same thing with reading in some ways. It's a developmental stage. We have one more comment, and then I think we're going to have to wrap up, and because we have only 3 minutes left. I asked my son to journal sometimes in the morning, sometimes at bed, whatever time we have, write a list of 5 things he's grateful for. I ask him to write 5, and sometimes he keeps writing way past 5. Not only benefits of writing, but also teaches him to stay in a grateful heart. Simple things as grateful for mom, video games, or whatever he wants. So that was a suggestion about getting kids to write, I think. Does anybody want to say anything in conclusion, because we only have a couple minutes left? Judy, said
Yeah.
2:30.
I'd like to really quickly, say I did a bit more reading again before this as well, and from different viewpoints. And one of the books that it was from a teacher who's, I think, a grade 6 teacher, who's like the book whisperer, she's called. And there's a portion of it talking about what she calls struggling readers. And that talked about just the difference usually is that the kids who are not struggling read a lot, have 75% more time, or 75% read 75% more than the struggling readers. But really, when it came to supporting them, what the expert that she had talked in this section of the book, what they talked about was encouraging those readers at where they're at, and many times the developmental space at where they're at as well, and encouraging them and creating an environment again of course they said, have them read more, but at the same time, reading is also opening up and not just having them sitting down and reading for an extra hour or 2 hours every day, but adding it to their life as well, having it as part of conversation and creating it around them, instead of having them write it in a log and then mark them and see measure them up against somebody else and how they're doing. It's really encouraging where they are at. And this is the same. I know many unschoolers who did not read. Actually, we have some friends, their boys did not read until they were 12 or later, actually. And then now it's like you can't get a book out of their hands. I know the stories of where they got in trouble because they stayed up with a flashlight in their bed all night long reading and couldn't get up in the morning, kind of thing. And these were kids who were not readers at all until they're close to their teenage. So just a little share, and I know I'm getting to the time, so I will pass it over.
I just wanted to thank everyone for coming. I know this was an interesting subject. I actually had to do some research before I came here today. So thanks for the questions that you sent ahead of time and the ones that you participated in with today. Thanks.
Okay, I want to say thanks too. And Golda and Robin, maybe tell everybody where they can find you, because on the internet. So thank you all for coming. You can find me at unschoolingtouniversity.com and or somewhere on Facebook. So.
And you can find my podcast, Honey, I'm Homeschooling the Kids, on any podcast player, Amazon, Spotify, iTunes. My website is imhomeschooling.com. You can find my podcast information there as well. I'm on Clubhouse. I have the club, Honey, I'm Homeschooling. It's supposed to be Honey, I'm Homeschooling the Kids, but they only have a certain amount of characters, where I hold weekly Saturday mornings at 8 a.m. Mountain Time and Tuesday afternoons at 4 p.m. Mountain Time. I have weekly rooms where we talk about homeschooling and unschooling and learning and self-directed learning. And yeah, so you can find me there on my website. Is a great place as well.
Yeah, and I'm at in Instagram at Jish Golda, and then I'm demystifyingeducation.com. So that's where you can find me. And then of course we'll have another one of these in a month, I think, right, ladies?
Yes, next month we're doing math.
Yeah, right, math.
Yay, I have lots to say about math. With 4 kids in STEM.
Yeah, I love talking about math as well. That's been kind of a focus. Judy actually was just on my podcast talking about math not too long ago. Beginning of this year, it's been a math self-directed learning focus. So
yeah, that's right. And I have a Facebook group called Unschooling STEM too. If you want to jump on there, we talk about all things math. Thanks everybody for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
So I'm gonna stop.